The fog rolled thick and heavy over the Atlantic, the kind that smothers sound and bends light. Off the Scilly Isles in May 1875, a German liner pressed ahead through that woolen dark. Deck rails dripped with mist, lamps glowed dim behind glass, and somewhere forward, a bell tolled into nothingness. The SS Schiller was nearly home from New York, carrying hundreds of souls, her cabins full of families, businessmen, and emigrants who whispered of letters waiting in Hamburg. She was a proud ship, polished wood and brass, but the sea has no interest in polish. On the bridge, the officers argued softly with the fog. Charts said one thing, the currents another. The western approaches are notorious. Tides twist a ship's position, and confidence can betray as surely as carelessness. Bearings were taken and retaken, a light was heard, or imagined, and the helmsman felt the ship's pulse through the wheel, praying each turn was the right one. They slowed, then pressed on, ears straining for a bell, eyes stinging in the wet. Speed, even cautious speed, carried them deeper into danger hidden under the gray. Past midnight, the ocean struck. First, a sickening shudder in the timbers, then the scream of iron against rock. The Schiller had run hard upon the retarrier ledges. The bow slammed to a halt, the stern slewed, and the liner, built for clean ocean runs, found herself pinned and tearing. Water poured through torn pladding, shock rolling along passageways. Passengers were pitched from bunks and woke to the sound of their world breaking apart. Panic leapt from cabin to cabin faster than the crew could answer. Stewards shouted for lifebelts, for calm, for order, but fear makes poor sailors. Families scrambled toward the deck, clutching children and a few precious things, documents, keepsakes, a pocket watch that felt like certainty in a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Rockets fired skyward, casting the fog a ghastly pink, then were swallowed whole. Lifeboats swung out, some lowered cleanly, others smashed against the hull as the ship heaved. An overloaded boat took water and rolled. Oars snapped like twigs. The Atlantic, blind and cold, showed no mercy. On deck, the captain's voice cut through the wind. "Hold fast, stand back, wait your turn." Some obeyed. Others shoved forward, desperate for a margin of survival that seemed to shrink with every wave. A woman clutched her husband's sleeve so tightly that even when he was torn from her, the imprint of her fingers remained. A boy barely awake from his bunk found himself in a lifeboat with strangers, retching from coal smoke and fear. Below, men worked the pumps until their arms failed and the handles kicked free. Each surge drove the Schiller harder against stone, each minute bending timbers toward the shape of surrender. Not far away, on St. Agnes and St. Mary's, islanders stirred in their beds. Fishermen know the language of fog, and something in the air told them a ship was in peril. Before dawn, pilot gigs were launched. Long, narrow boats rowed by steady hearts. They pulled toward the muffled glow and the cries they thought they heard between the waves. The fog clung like wool, soaking hats and sleeves, but the rhythm of the oars carried them closer to the wreck. For those still aboard, the night stretched like eternity. Hours passed with water lashing at boots, timbers groaning, prayers whispered in every tongue. A stewardess, soaked and shivering, wrapped her shawl around a child who was not her own. A machinist brought up a bag of biscuits and passed them around, as if dry crumbs could hold back despair. Some passengers climbed to the highest points of the tilted deck, knuckles white on the rail, waiting for dawn the way prisoners wait for a verdict. At first light, the fog thinned just enough to show the wound. The Schiller clung to the rocks at a murderous angle, her hull broken, the sea frothing with wreckage. Islanders in their gigs came alongside. Survivors were hauled aboard with rough, careful hands. One woman lost a shoe in the transfer. The fisherman who caught her carried the crescent marks of her grip for hours after. Around them drifted splintered timbers, torn canvas, and lifeboats turned belly up. cruel evidence of how many had been claimed before help could find the place. The rescued were carried ashore, wrapped in blankets heated by stoves, given tea in trembling hands. Churches opened to shelter the saved and receive the dead. Along the beaches, islanders moved with reverent care, lifting bodies, covering faces, gathering keepsakes that might identify them later: a locket, a child's shoe, a stamped bag tag, tokens of lives cut short. The toll mounted, more than 300 lost, a handful saved. Telegraph wires rattled with the news, and in Hamburg, New York, and London, families learned by cable that their loved ones had not returned. Later, inquiries filled rooms with charts and testimony. Did the captain mistake the bell? Should the lead line have been used more often? Did confidence blind judgment at the edge of land? Salvage men argued about cargo, insurers about liability. Newspapers dwelled on jewels recovered from the surf, on the particular cruelty of fog and tide. But none of that mattered to those who had rode through the mist or lifted strangers from the water. For them, memory was not debate. It was faces, voices, the sound of timbers splintering in the dark, and the cold ache in their hands the morning after. The survivors spoke with the halting clarity of trauma. One remembered the quiet, so quiet it felt like the world had ended. Another heard the crack of wood and could not forget it. A third swore she smelled flowers on the wind just before rescue came. Such fragments were how grief announced itself: sharp, strange, refusing to line up neatly. For the islanders, the lesson lived in silence, in blankets kept ready, in stories passed down like recipes. Offer tea, offer warmth, offer the mercy you would want for your own. The Scilly Isles have seen wrecks before and since, but the Schiller remains among the darkest. On certain mornings, the old bell still tolls through the mist, and people glance instinctively toward the sea. Stand on that shore, and you can imagine it: the fog, the grinding timbers, the cries that blurred into wind, and the stubborn miracle of small boats emerging with salvation. The Schiller set out to cross an ocean, and instead wrote its name into the rocks, leaving a warning etched deeper than any chart: respect the fog, respect the sea, or they will make liars of you. In the weeks that followed, flotsam kept arriving like late letters. Farmers found trunks wedged in hedges half a mile inland after a gale, their brass corners greened by salt. On St. Martin's, a child turned up a silver spoon with a Hamburg maker's mark and asked whether the sea could be taught manners. Names were read aloud in parish halls, syllables stumbling over foreign consonants until they sounded like local grief. Shipwrights stared at the charts and argued over fathoms, then grew quiet at the thought of lantern light on wet rock. Evenings, men who had rowed the gigs kept their oars close by the door, as if the fog might knock again and ask for more hands. From the mainland came promises: better signals, clearer bells, stricter rules about speed in fog. Some were kept, some faded like chalk in rain. The lesson that stayed was simpler than regulation: slow down when the world goes missing, let humility steer when sight fails, and when the sea begins to sound like a crowd in the next room, understand that rocks are speaking through it. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.